Hey you folks, Quicky here, and welcome to, I don't know, a sort of Unity Quickie. With Ludum Dare right around the corner, I thought it might be a good idea to release a little bit of extra content for people to use for their own project. This isn't a tutorial, but this is just to showcase a little script that I wrote that is going to be available to download down below in the description box. It's for a 2D platformer character controller. There's not really one included with Unity, and while there's a few sort of suggestions and things kicking around, they didn't really meet my what I was looking for, the sort of thing that I might want in a platformer, and specifically things like wall jumping and that sort of thing. So I decided to go ahead and write a little quick thing up that works with both platformers, can grab walls, and can even grab onto platformers on the side or on moving platforms, which is kind of neat. I think it uses just rigid body physics to move the character around. I'll give you a quick little demo over here, and then I'll go through the script very, very quickly. Again, it's not going to be a tutorial on how this was made, but if you want to download the script and use it in your own projects, you'll be able to do that. So I can do, oops, I'm using the keyboard here, and I should be using the controller. It's a lot easier with the controller, I find. And I missed the platform. But if I go and reload here, and I can grab onto the edge of the platform, as you can see. So I can do that and sort of jump back on. And, so I thought it would be interesting to make something that, A, works with moving platforms, which is, like, non-trivial. You have to make a little bit of work for your character to sort of properly stick to a moving platform, and doubly so with the wall grabbing. I felt like. So just a basic little platformer kind of controller. It works pretty good. Again, it works with the keyboard, and it works with the controller. I don't have any code in here for ladders, which I guess would be the only thing that would be missing. But other than that, it's not bad. So looking through the code very, very quickly over here. If I pull it up, there's a few variables that you can set in the inspector. The horizontal speed of your character, the jump speed, whether your platform will add to a jump. This comes up if you're jumping. If the platform is moving upward and you jump, this will make you effectively, jump upwards that much faster. You try it one way versus the other from launching on a platform. You'll see what it does. The biggest difference, I suppose, is if for some reason you were on a platform that was moving at 12 units per second upwards, then if this was off and you hit the jump key, basically nothing would happen. But if this was set to true, then you would be jumping upward effectively at 24 velocity instead of 12, that sort of thing. Whether wall grabbing is allowed, whether wall jumping. So if you're grabbing onto a wall and you hit the jump key, whether it will fling you off the wall in a sort of a special way. This is the ability to disable gravity during wall grab. You may have noticed when we're playing the game over here, if we run over to the wall and sort of and grab it, we're still sliding down. That's because gravity still is taking effect. I have it set so while you're grabbing, I'm setting my Y velocity to 0, but then gravity kicks in right after that to still pull me down ever so slowly. And so what you could do is while you're actually grabbing onto the wall, if you set this to true while you're grabbing onto the wall, it'll set the gravity scale parameter on our 2D rigid body. It'll set the gravity scale to 0. But because of the way I've got my collider set up, it'll actually lead to slight weirdness. I can give you an example. So if I turn on disable gravity during wall jumps, just because of my current collider setup, it'll look weird. It'll like actually sort of drift, like it's still going up, and in fact it'll still be going down, and sometimes it'll actually, like I don't know if you noticed right there, it actually started drifting upwards. There you go. So you get these weird slide effects, and it's still not quite right, and that's because my colliders on my character, they're all circle colliders, and I really like the result of this. So there's one kind of around the head and one more around the body, and then these little roundy bits over here. And the reason I'm using these circle colliders, if I go and turn off the disable gravity during wall jump, is because with the box colliders, I was getting a lot of situations where as I was sort of sliding around on the ground or even sliding down the wall, the square colliders would kind of grab onto some of these little edges. Even though everything is perfectly aligned, like all these objects over here are all perfectly aligned, the sort of the corners would somehow, for whatever reason, still click in. There's probably a way to avoid that. But there you have it. The other thing to note, again, I'm using a 2D rigid body, and I'm using colliders to control my character around here, but one of the things to point out is that we could do all kinds of ray tracing. That's the other, ray casting is the other solution. Instead of using the sort of physics system to move your character around, you can use ray cast to detect if someone is grounded or bumping into a wall, which may or may not lead to better behavior. This was just, in my opinion, a little bit simpler and easier to set up. You can get rid of the two bottom little circles here. You can get rid of those two as colliders if you want. That may, depending on exactly what you're trying to do, that may or may not improve things. Which ones are there? It'd be nice if you could name the components, but for whatever reason you can't. I guess it's, yeah, the ones with the smaller radius. If I do this, it'll still mostly work the same way. But the most notable thing is when you get to sort of an edge, you slide off a lot easier. And by having those 2 extra little circles there, it stops you from sort of sliding off an edge in kind of a weird way that you might not, that you might not expect. Now you can still slide a little because it's still around, but by that point you're pretty far over. Like if I keep nudging over here, there, you have to basically be right over the edge of things before you start sliding. And to me, that was just a little bit better. Anyway, so to go back over here, this is the layer mask that determines what walls are grabbable. If I go and shrink these back down again, and we look at our PlatCare controller, this wall grab mask, you see I have it just set to the grabbable layer. So the only thing I can wall grab on are things that are on the grabbable layer, which is right over here. And by default, I'm doing all of my, you know, again, all of my landscape and my walls and stuff are set to the grabbable layer, but you could have something that's icy if you wanted. Wall jump control delay. So this is something where right now, because of my controls, I have it set, I'm holding the right key down to grab the wall. And if I hit jump, there's that like delay that, because if as I keep holding right after I jump, if I didn't have that delay in there, I would just instantly stick back to the wall. Here, there's a little bit of a delay where I'm still sort of flinging away from the wall. And based on other games that I played, it seems like a pretty reasonable thing. In fact, at 0.15, it's still pretty short. If I go in here and I change it to say like that, so 1/4 second wall jump delay, if I do it this way, then you're going to see if I keep holding down the right key, or the left key in this example, I get quite a bit further before it changes direction. And that stops you from doing sort of a really unnatural sort of jumping up on walls, but it also gives the player a little bit more time to switch. When you're doing these sorts of jumps from one side to the other, there's going to be that delay when the player's like, I'm holding left, I'm jumping, and then I'm releasing and I'm hitting the right arrow to grab onto the other wall. If I have a short delay or no delay, I mean, I guess I could literally demonstrate that, right? If I turn the wall jump delay to 0, you're going to see it's going to be not quite as nice, depending on what you're trying to do. So now you can see there, like I hit space and just it instantly sticks me back into the wall as I keep holding down the right arrow key. And because when I do the wall jump, I'm still adding a vertical component. I sort of crawl up the wall in maybe a way that is not what you're looking for. So that's why I put that in there, and it started to feel pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and leave in, you know what, I'll call it 0.2 and then say that's good. And then finally, I've got the grab point. Now, one of the things in some of the demos I've seen, what the people will do is they will put an empty inside of the game object, and what you do is you position the empty at sort of the point where you want to test for the wall grab. And that's probably the better way to do things. And what you would do is you would put it basically, if I go to my character here and I go to the animation, and I switch to my jump animation, which is also my wall grab animation. Is it not actually showing me that? I have to hit play. There we go. If I take a look at that and I stop, it doesn't stick it there. Because I'm just using the jump animation during the wall grab, this spot where my hand is, that to me is like the most logical place for us to test if we're grabbing, because it's literally, if there's sort of terrain right here, I want to be able to grab onto it. And so you could have a transform in here called something like grab spot, and then link that transform into your script and then use it that way, which is probably better. But as it was, I just sort of fudged it by getting a vector 2 in here and just manually typing in the coordinates of where the grab point might be. So I've got it 0 on the Y. That way it's aligned to the main character transform. And then 0.45 is basically the width of my character, or rather from the middle point of the character to the right-hand side. So it was like the grab point is right over here. And that seemed reasonable enough, and it seems to be working. So those are all the parameters you can pass in. And there's the bookkeeping things, right? So the wall jump control delay, and then how much is actually left. This is what gets counted down. The grab point. Moving platform. So when we land on the moving platform, here's a few things. In addition to, a few things that are important. Your character, you do need to set up with some colliders. You might want to try box colliders, different circle colliders, try different setups. Mine is not necessarily the way to go. You do want to set a rigid body on there. You need to make sure to turn on fixed angle. If you don't turn on fixed angle, what'll happen is your character, as you move around, will fall over. And because I've got the camera is actually attached to the character, it looks like the whole world is flipped over, but the character is just flopped over. By turning on fixed angle in the rigid body 2D, it'll stop the character from falling over. and which is, you know, kind of reasonable for a platformer. That's usually the way we want to do things. Although maybe when you die, if your character dies, you can turn off the fixed angle at that point and then actually have them fall over, which would be kind of neat. And yeah, I just have the main camera inside the character. You may or may not want to do that. For that test, I did that. What you might actually want to do is have the main camera separate and then write a script where the camera follows the character. But does so in, you know, with a little bit of delay, or, see, now that doesn't follow anything at all. Classically, in something like Mario Brothers or something like that, what'll happen is it doesn't strictly follow left to right. Instead, there's a bit of like, as you move to the right, once you get to a certain point, then the camera moves with you. And then if you move left, you can move left to maybe around here without the camera sort of swinging by right away. Well, actually, I suppose in the original Super Mario Brothers, you can't go left at all. So the camera can only ever go to the right as your character advances. But something like Mario 3, it's got that sort of little window. As you just wiggle back and forth like this, the camera won't move with you until you sort of escape that initial zone. So a couple of different ways to work things. There was one other thing. Oh, right. Okay. By default, the physical material or physics material applied to all objects will have something like a friction of 0.4 and maybe even a bounciness, I'm not sure. And you don't want that. If I go and set the friction back to 0.4, which is the default physical material in the world, then what happens, I'm not holding a key. Well, yeah, your character will sort of stick to the wall. I'm not wall grabbing here. And in fact, it would be better if I didn't have wall grabbing enabled. Actually, I think I can do that. If I disable wall grabbing and wall jumping, and now I push against a wall, you can see I'm sticking to the wall. And the reason is, as I'm holding down the right key, my character is being pushed by my forces. It's being given a velocity towards the right. And because there's a little bit of friction there, it sticks. If I let go of the key, it'll eventually fall off at that point. And so what you want to do is you want to have a world with zero friction. And then what happens now is I will just slide off the wall exactly as you should. So, so zero friction. So the way you do that is you would go into your project, create a physics material, actually physics 2D material, which will give you this thing, and just set all the numbers to 0. No bounciness, no friction, and then go into Edit, Project Settings, Physics 2D, and there'll be a default material here. So normally this would be blank, and a blank entry in there is the same as having a 0.4 over here. So what you do is you create a material first, and then you go into your project settings, physics 2D, drag your slippery material into there, which will fix things up. I don't think I've made any other changes to the physics system at all. You'll note the 3D system has exactly the same thing that happens here. You can set a default material, and this is what it normally looks like. It's a none, in which case it tries to set reasonable defaults. So you want your thing to be fully slippery, and then you'll just slide off the walls, unless you're wall grabbing with these things, in which case then you're manually choosing exactly how you want your wall behavior to work. I suppose now that I think about it, one of the ways I could avoid the sliding is I could just set some sort of physics material or change something, but anyway, we're not going to bother about that. Yeah, I think that's all the world setup you need. These graphics are more of those same open art graphics I use all the time. What's the guy's name? Kenny. These are some of his platformer graphics that I just use as placeholder, but they're just standard sprites. Anyway, you can just download the whole project and see exactly how it works and pull in some animations and do whatever you want to go. You will need an animator with, well, these are the animations I have. I'm actually not using fall right now, I don't think. But the idea was you could have two different animations for jump and falling, and then play them depending on, like, for jump, for example, you could have it if the Y speed is positive, and then for fall, you could have it if the Y speed would be negative, which is how I have it set up right now in the animator flowchart. But what happens is in my actual platform character script, when I update the animations, and again, I'll step through this in a second, the Y speed over here, I'm actually passing it the absolute Y speed. So it's always going to be a positive number. It's going to be 0 is going to be the minimum, and then it's going to go up there. But those are some varieties you can do. So you'll need an animator and theoretically some animations, and you'll need the X speed parameter and the Y speed parameter. So again, those will all be in the project, and you'll be able to see them in there. If we actually look at the project, you can see the character art. This is the animator, and I made 2 animations, actually 3 animations, my bad. And then these are the actual sprites, which are then brought into the animation. I mean, I suppose I could show you real quick how to make an animation, just in case you don't know. You can go create animation, or what you can do, especially if it's going to be on a specific character. Well, it doesn't matter. Let's go the long way. We go create animation. This is going to be test anim. And then if we click on this, or if we go into our animation window, which I have here, but you can also go to window and grab animation from there. Not animator, but animation. So now what we can do, it'll show us the animations on the current character. Really, it only shows us that. How do we edit this specifically? Huh. Interesting. But if we were to add this to our animator for our character, now it should show up in this animation menu. Yeah. Oh, well. All right, so here's a new animation we're going to make. And I'm just going to grab a bunch of these images and drag them into my animation. And so now this test animation is, well, it's just my walk cycle again. That's all there is to it. You can change the speed over here. If you change the sample speed to something like 12, then it'll cycle through a lot slower. This is how many frames per second the animation plays at. And for 2D stuff like this, you're not going to want like 60 frames per second because you don't want to draw that many things. Or, I mean, maybe you do. It'll just loop that much faster, right? So if I switch this to 60, then he'll just be walking a lot faster as he burns through all of these frames. All right, so anyway, that's it. We're going to, the test animation, then you can add it to your animator. This is, anyway, this is not what this video is supposed to be about. The video is supposed to be about me talking about the script so that if you want to use it, you could, but there you go. So those are all my little modifiers. Oh yeah, the moving platform. I'll show you the importance of the moving platform, but basically we need to track a moving platform that we're interacting with because it's going to affect our movement. Our animator. The way I'm checking to see if we're grounded, there's a few different ways of doing it. So we need to know if we're touching the ground, right? That's an important thing so that we know if we should jump. For example, little things like that. So if we are touching the ground, the way I'm testing for that is I'm actually testing our vertical velocity. If our vertical velocity is 0, then I assume we're touching the ground. There's other ways of doing it. You can do raycast, you can check for collisions, you can put a little trigger box in your character, all kinds of different ways. I found that this resulted in really, really, really reliable behavior, and I liked it quite a bit, especially with edge grabbing and stuff like that. Or not edge grabbing, but like sort of hanging on the corner of a box. If you do it a raycast, it might miss, and if you've got your trigger underneath it, it might not be accurate unless you really fiddle with it. And this way it was just like, listen, if I'm not falling, then I'm going to assume I'm on the ground. The problem with that is technically at the very top of your jump arc, the very top of it, there's a moment where your speed goes down to 0. And depending on what speed you're using and what frame rate you're using for your physics and stuff like that, it's possible that you'll actually, as your script will run, your fixed update will hit that 0 speed. So I actually require us to be at a 0 speed for 2 frames in a row for it to be considered grounded. So that's what this little placeholder is. And this is just a command. Does the player want us to jump? I grab the animator during the start. On collision, enter 2D. So when we collide with something in the world, because we are moving via physics here. So I move the character by giving it a velocity, and then it bumps into something, either on the ground, being pulled down by gravity, or it'll bump into a wall. Every time we bump into something, I check to see if it's got a component on it called moving platform. If it is, I just grab that copy. So the very last, whatever the most recent object we hit that has a moving platform component on it, we save as a moving platform. I'll also point out that every time we become not grounded, every time I leave the ground, okay, every time is grounded is false, I set moving platform back to null, because if we're not grounded, we're clearly not touching a platform. So that way it does that. It also works out pretty well. If I take my platform over here, if I double this guy up, and take this one and tell it to just move in the X direction. So if I play this, there we go. You can see they crisscross effectively. All right, I'll show you again. We're standing on one, and then we collide against the other, and then it just switches what my active platform is. And it works exactly how you would expect. So that's what the on collision enter 2D does. It just tracks our latest platform that we touch. Here's my is grounded function. You'll notice that I'm checking to see if our velocity, if our vertical velocity is 0, but I'm not actually checking the number 0. I'm basing it on our platform velocity. Platform velocity will tell us the speed of our platform in the y direction. So you can see this platform here has got a y of -2, and this other platform has a y of 0. So this just tells me what the y of the platform is on. If I'm not touching a platform, if I've jumped, so, you know, I'm not attached to any platform here as well, I wouldn't be attached to any platform, then the platform velocity here just returns a 0 vector. You'll see that in a second. So here's where I'm checking to see if our velocity, the difference between our velocity and the quote-unquote zero velocity, if the absolute number of that is basically zero. Checking floats for zeros, for exact zeros, is bad, so I'm just checking to see if it's less than 0.1. If the absolute value of our velocity relative to the 0 point is basically zero, in which case we're probably grounded. But again, I need to make sure that we are grounded 2 frames in a row. So I check to see, were we grounded last frame? Yes. Okay, then return true. Otherwise, we're returning false. So if we're grounded, if we're quote unquote grounded this frame, we set grounded last frame to be equal to true. And then, yeah, so there. So a bit of a thing. Are we grabbing? There's a bunch of different ways to check for grabbing this. Again, what you could do is you could set up a little bit of a trigger inside your character. So, I mean, we could have something like create empty child and put a box collider 2D on this guy and then move it to somewhere like this and set it to its trigger. And then, you know, this is the wall grab trigger. And then what you would have to do is you would have to attach a script onto this that checks on trigger enter and stuff like that on this guy to see if we're grabbing the wall and whatnot. And I just felt that it was easier to have it work in script here. So what I do is there's a bunch of if statements here, but basically I'm checking to see if we're pushing in the direction that we're facing. Our local scale.x is either going to be 1 if we're facing to the right or -1 if we're facing to the left. So if we're pushing the joystick in the direction that we're facing, you know, either towards the right or towards the left, and there's a double and over here. Oh, first we check to see if we're allowed to wall grab. If we're not allowed to wall grab, then we just return false right away. And then, so after we check that we're pushing the joystick in the direction of our facing, then what I do is I do an overlap circle cast in that position, that grab point. So where our grab point is, which is around here, I do a little circle cast right here. And if that circle is overlapping with anything at all that has our grabbable mask, then this will return true, which means this whole line, this is one line of code, this whole line of code will return true, that we are grabbing. But if any of those things are false, if we're not pushing the joystick in the way that we're facing or we're not, or we're not actually overlapping anything grabbable, then we would return false. Here's our update routine. Update runs every visual frame. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, the get key down or get button down or get key up or get button up codes don't work properly if you run them in fixed update, because this just checks to see if the key was pushed down since the last frame. So since the last visual frame. So every visual frame, which is what update is, we check to see if the key was pushed down. And then if it was, we just set our flag, our jumping flag, to true. And then in our actual fixed update, we will be checking the status of this jumping flag, and we'll also reset it to false at that point. Here's our relative velocity. I suppose I just realized in my is grounded code, instead of grabbing the 0, what I could do is relative velocity dot y. That's a little bit simpler, actually. If our relative velocity between our velocity and the platform's velocity, so our effective relative velocity to the platform we're attached to, if there's a platform at all, if this is basically nothing, then we're grounded. So there we go. So you can see here, so the relative velocity is our velocity minus the platform velocity, and if we check the platform's velocity, you can see if we don't have a platform, it just returns a 0 vector. Otherwise, it returns the velocity of the platform. And then we got our actual fixed update. So first thing we do is we check, okay, so are we grounded and are we grabbing anything? You'll note that I have it set up so that if we're grounded, we're not considered to be grabbing anything, because otherwise what would happen is when we got down here, if I was pushing towards the right, he would actually move into the wall grab animation, which just didn't feel right. And especially if I hit space at that point, it would do the wall jump, which would send me backwards, right? Like that. You know, we do that thing where you jump away from the wall. And to me, when you're here and you hit space, it should jump up. So that just felt better to do that. Make sure that we can actually wall grab at that point. Which this was also important because, actually I don't remember, that might not be required anymore. Wall jump, control delay left. That may not be required. Let me see here. I might be able to simplify my code. Yeah, I think originally the reason that was in there is for this situation, when I jumped up in the corner, what was happening is it was instantly grabbing the wall and stopping my jump. But now I have it so that the wall grab doesn't do anything if I'm still moving up, which may or may not be what you want, right? If I am moving upwards, it's not grabbing. It only grabs on the way down. So again, that may or may not be what you want. Based on my current settings, it feels fine. But if we did something ridiculous, like we took our character and we changed our jump speed to like a really high number, like 25 would be pretty ridiculous. We'd be able to jump pretty high, right? There we go. It's like using a Game Genie. If I do this, I'm holding and do this and I hold right, you can see like I can't grab the wall on my way up. I don't know if it was obvious, but I was hitting right there. I can't grab the wall on the way up. Based on my current settings, which may or may not be what you want. If you want to be able to grab the wall on the way up, but you don't want that corner case over here to look weird and like instantly grab the wall, then what you do when you jump is you always give it a little bit of jump control, wall jump control delay, so that you can't instantly grab the wall. Anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but there you have it. Anyway, jump speed, putting it back to 12. I should probably put in like some sort of option in there. So here, if we have a moving platform, like if we have a link to a moving platform, but we're not grounded in any of these ways, then set our moving platform to 0. And it's important to check the grounded last frame here, because technically we might not be, actually I don't need to check the second is grounded, because if is grounded is false, grounded last frame will always be false. The reason we check this instead of is grounded is because the first frame we land on a platform, right, the first frame we land anywhere, the very first frame, it doesn't return is grounded instantly. It's only on the next frame that it actually returns is grounded equal true, again, for that workaround for the top of the arc. And so what would happen is it wouldn't consider us to be landed on the platform on the second frame. But if the platform was moving downwards, then the problem was we always had a negative velocity, which meant we would never truly be grounded. Anyway, all that was important to put in there. Disabled gravity during wall jumps. I talked about that before, and I talked about how it does some weird drifting, so there's a bit of a warning in there. And yeah, so then we get into our actual velocity calculations. So we grab our current velocity in the x and y coordinates and save them in variables. If we're grounded, then we need to make sure that our y velocity is actually set to our platform's velocity, so we stay there. And I give it a tiny negative just so we stay properly stuck to the surface. If you don't do this every now and again, especially on a downwards moving platform, your character might just go into the jumping or the falling animation for a couple of frames. And so just helping us stick to the platform, I found it was very, very helpful. We decrease our wall jump control delay left, based on how much time is passing. If we're grounded or we're grabbing, we can reset this to 0. And if we don't have any of this control delay put in there, then we allow this this horizontal control. And again, you might want to have that on for a normal jump as well. Like I think right now I have it so that you can basically control your jump right away, but you might not want to be able to do that. You might want to have it so that if you start your jump, like if you jump straight up or you're starting towards the left, maybe you can't change your direction instantly. And right now you've got pretty much instantaneous ability to alter your path. So those are the sort of magic numbers you can play with. If we are grabbing, and here's the thing I was talking about, if is grabbing is set to true and we're moving downwards. Actually, I suppose I could, better check here would be and relative velocity dot y is less than 0. Less than or equal to 0 perhaps, then we grab. So right now, this is the code that means we can only grab on our way down. So we can't grab stuff on our way up. It's only on our way down that we grab things. So if you don't like that behavior, you can make a change right over here to that. Let's see here. Still, yeah, everything's good. All right. What is this? Oh, yeah, there was some weird stuff where it could, we might bounce off. It was very important to not, as soon as we go into grabbing mode, you don't want to set your x velocity to 0. And the reason for that, and if I comment this out, I might be able to demonstrate the problem I was running into. The reason for that is if you set, well, that doesn't set it to 0, actually, I'm being wrong. If I hold on here, yeah, it'll do this weird sort of bouncy, bouncy, bouncy. And the reason is, as I'm holding the right key, I'm still applying this velocity towards the right, which causes a bit of an intersection. And if you make it so that while you're grabbing, your velocity is set to 0, which I can do, right? If I go and, so if I'm grabbing, then xvel equals 0. If I just set my x velocity to 0, then what will happen instead is I'll actually drift away from the surface. Well, if that platform gets in the way, I won't be able to show it. It may or may not show it. Now, part of it is because of round colliders and stuff. But anyway, or no, that was the other problem. If I set it to 0 as soon as I'm grabbing, sometimes I won't grab with like pixel perfect accuracy. I'll be a little further away from the surface for whatever reason. So anyway, all that is we make sure that we don't set our x velocity to 0 until we sort of bounce off. Anyway, you can read the comments. This is if the jumping key was pushed and we're grounded, or we're grabbing and wall jumping is allowed, then we're going to go ahead and do the jump. So we set our y velocity to our jump speed. We may add the platform velocity if that option is set. And if we're grabbing, we're also going to throw ourselves away from the wall. And this is where we're going to set our wall jump control delay. You could also set a control delay, you know, here if you wanted all jumps to have that horizontal control delay, which you might want to rename this variable for that. Then we set our jumping flag to false. Then we actually apply our velocity. We update our facing here. So we basically are making sure that we are facing in the direction of our movement based on our inputs over here. So we set our scale to either be 1 or -1 for left and right facing. And then we set our animation. So we've got an xspeed variable where we actually pass it our speed. Note that I'm always sending the absolute value. So it's a speed and not velocity is what I'm passing. So it will never be a negative number. And then the same thing here for the jump. Now notice I don't have my own grabbing animation. What you could do if you had your own proper grabbing animation, you do something like anim.set bool is grabbing, and then true. Right? You can do that and then make sure to set it false somewhere else if you had a separate animation, but I didn't. So all I do for my is grabbing is I just set like basically an infinite Y speed so that I'm just locked into the jump animation. And then otherwise, I actually pass my current Y speed, my actual Y velocity to this here, because it's possible that you might have an animation that changes as your speed changes, right? A very low speed Y, you might not even go into the jump setting right away. And then by the time you get to the high extreme, your guy might like look like he's freaking out, especially if you start passing negative numbers and you have a special falling animation. But I didn't, so I left it there. In fact, it probably makes a lot more sense to do this, just pass the actual Y speed, and then in here, I don't know why I ended up changing my mind. Oh, it's because I was tweaking the transitions, and I didn't want to have to like fiddle around with too many numbers and things. This would probably work fine right now, though. So yeah, if I hit the jump, I've got the positive Y animation, so it's actually playing the Y animation, or the jumping animation. But then as I'm falling, it's going to switch to a -1. We can actually, if we turn off the maximize on play, we should actually be able to watch which animations are being played. I think I need my character selected, though. So I'm going to jump. Oops. Fail to jump, actually, because of the second platform here. There you go. You can see on my way up, it plays jump, and on my way down, it's playing falling, which becomes important if we actually fall for reals. Now, and again, you might want different falling animations. If you might want to set some sort of filter up here or a blend state so that if the falling speed is reasonable, you're still just playing the normal jump animation. And it's only when the fall speed falls below, you know, -50 or some ridiculous speed, then you turn into the I'm freaking out kind of animation. And that brings us to the end of the script. So hopefully you find this useful. I realize it's not a real tutorial. It's more like documenting some script that I put together, which may or may not be a good script. But if you're planning on making a platformer for Unity or for Ludum Dare this weekend, you might find it useful to have this as a reference. And stay tuned for maybe a more proper platformer tutorial in the future. See you next time, folks. Bye-bye.